Hello and welcome back. So in this lesson we will practice a bit of loading of assets, basically putting into practice what we've covered in a previous lesson. And to do so, I'll be using this UI pack from Kenny. So the end result that I want you to get to before I show you how I would do it is to render some images to the screen, basically, wherever you want. It doesn't have to be in this position. And as I said, I'm using assets from Kenny, so you'd basically go to kenny.nl and filter by UI and get the UI pack, this one. So that'll be this one over here. You'd simply download this somewhere on your machine, and I won't do that because I already have. And I'm using, if you want to use the same images I'm using, I'll be using under PNG, there's a gray directory. Under default, I have picked the rectangle depth flat gloss and gradient. Okay, so I would simply copy these three over to the project I created under public assets. And so basically that's it. I want you to get these assets, copy them over to public assets, and load them and display them somewhere on the screen. So I'll give that a go, and then I will do that. Okay, so basically this is how I would do it. I would first get the template in question, make sure you're using the same template so we're using the same code. And I would basically create an 07 button directory, cd into that, pnpm install to get the dependencies, and pnpm dev to run the dev server. We can have a look at the dev server and just make sure everything's running. Okay, and with that, I'm ready to copy over the flat, gloss, and gradient. So I'll simply copy those over to public assets. And because I want the name and I don't want to stay typing at all, I will copy one of them and go to my preloader, right? This is where we're loading the assets for our games, right? So it's a bit of a reminder. The first argument is the key, right? We'll be referencing this image with in our game when we create game objects with it. And the second is a path to the actual asset. And this template is using setPath, giving it an assets argument. So basically, from our public directory, we do not need to specify assets when we specify the names, all right? So all I need to do is basically copy this over 3 times, and I need to supply it with the right arguments. So that will be flat. I think it was gloss and gradient. Let me double check. That will be it. Flat, gloss, and gradient. So I will key these appropriately with something like flat, gloss, and gradient. And now basically I can move over to rendering them, right? So I've loaded these assets up. I have a way to reference them via these strings, flat, gloss, and gradient. And if I go to my main menu scene now, which is what happens after preload, after the preloader scene, I can basically get rid of this template code. I can leave the background, but the same way that the background's being loaded, right, with this add image, I can load 3 separate ones. In this case, there is background over here, but I don't have it on the class, so let me just const flat gloss and gradient. And yeah, simply use the same key that we used, right? Gloss and gradient. So I only see one of them, but obviously since we're rendering them at the same X and Y position, it's basically rendering the last one, the gradient one, because that's the way these things are painted onto the screen, right? If I add flat last, then flat will be the last one painted onto the screen. And there isn't much of a difference. Maybe you can't really see these very well, but that's the way they are rendered, right? So the first one is rendered, and the second one, since it's rendered at the same position, it has the same width and height, it will cover the gloss, and same will deal with the flat, it will hover the gradient and the gloss. So I'm put this back where it was, and to basically give them some space, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a width, and I'm going to assign this to this dot scale dot width. Same thing for the height. Okay, now this will take things, if I actually use them, width and height. You'll notice now they're rendering down here, basically. If I were to set these to 0 instead, they'll render in the top left corner, right? And as you remember, 0, 0 is our top left. So as you can see with this is that the X and Y coordinate that we pass into this .add.image. And as a reminder, this is how we're creating game objects, right? We're creating an image game object using the scenes add, the game object factory, right? It's expecting to be passed an X and a Y. And this X and a Y is actually the middle of the image. That's the origin. Now we could change this. For example, I could set origin to be 0 on both X and Y, and that, as you can see, the first image now renders with its top left being the origin instead of its center. All right, the rest they're rendering with the origin at their center. We could do that, but basically I'll keep rendering to the 512384 coordinates, and to show you where these are coming from, right? If I go to main, and the template has generated it with 1024 and 768 for the width and the height. And if we divide these values by 2, we get the values that the template is using over here, right? And if I can show you that if I simply use the same width and height and divide them by 2, we will get the same right position in the center. And you can play around with these values if you window dot flat, for example, and assign flat to that. You can then inspect its dot width and dot height, or you could assign it to width, or even just this, right? I could say scene is this, and if I go here to the DevTools, I can do scene.scale.width, right? And that will give me the 1024. And if I divide by 2, that will give me the 512. So that's where that value is coming from. To make this a bit more clear, actually, in main here, you can see we have a scale config for it. And these width and height, they can actually be passed into to scale directly. So that's where they're coming from. If I reload now, nothing has changed. And if I were to set the width to much higher, basically, as you can see, it's affecting the width of the game. So basically, the width and height can be passed in to more than just one place, either at the top level or inside scale. And we can then, via our scene, we can use this dot scale and access those values. So yeah, so in order to get them to render a bit with some spacing, basically what I can do is I can add some height. I can do flat, or even I can do flat dot height for this one, and maybe flat dot height times 2. They do have the same width and height. And with that, as you can see, we have the 3 images rendered separately, right? They're not very, it's not very obvious that they're different. Basically, you can think of this like a hover effect. The second one, as you can see, like half of it is kind of grayed out. And the third one is when you maybe click on the button, right? All right, so we'll be using these images in the next lesson to interact with our button basically and give it different effects when we're hovering and pressing on it. But yeah, that's the task for this one, getting you to practice a bit of loading the images and rendering to the screen. And with that, I'll see you in the next one.